Alrighty friends, we are going to do part 2 of our labor and delivery story. So labor and delivery was part 1. We are going to talk about postpartum and rehospitalization, and then postpartum at home and all the craziness that happened after baby A was born. If you missed part 1, I'm going to link it down in the description box, and I will also pin a comment. So if you're interested in watching part 1 of this, go ahead and watch that first so that this part makes sense. So baby A was born at 1:50 a.m. and I was diagnosed with preeclampsia. I was on that magnesium, and I had to be on magnesium for 24 hours after he was born. And that is to help reduce the risk of seizures and stroke. I'm still on blood pressure medication at this time. And at this time, they have stitched me up. We've done our golden hour with baby on me. They have gotten me stable. They've taken the catheter out. That was one thing I forgot to mention in the birth vlog, is that I was worried about getting a catheter placed. I knew that if I had wanted an epidural, a catheter was going to be placed, and I was scared about that whole process because I've never had that before. And it actually ended up being a positive thing. I suffer from an overactive bladder. That's just something, if you're new around here, I've kind of mentioned it a little bit, that my bladder is very, very sensitive, and I have to sometimes be careful with diet and things to keep my bladder under control. And so not having to get up to go to the bathroom during the labor and delivery process was actually a really positive experience, and I'm gonna get into that a little bit more in just a minute. But we are now on magnesium. The whole night after he was born was a little bit of a whirlwind. It's a little bit foggy of what exactly happened. I know that at one point I had gotten up and I had told a nurse that I needed to use the restroom. I had felt the need to use the restroom, which was the first time I had felt that need, because after baby was born and they got me all stitched up and cleaned up and everything, because I did have a 2-degree tear. They take the catheter out, and I got it to use the restroom. One of the nurses wanted me to use a bedpan, and I was stubborn. And that was the only nurse that I kind of had like this weird vibe from. Every other nurse was absolutely phenomenal. And I was like, I'm not gonna use the bedpan. I'm a grown adult, I can get up to go to the restroom. That probably was something that I did not need to push, because I about passed out as I was on the toilet. There ended up being 4 nurses in there to get me up. I remember at one point they asked, the nurse was like, Becky, are you still with me? And I remember telling her like, yes, but barely. I wasn't scared for myself in that moment, but I could tell the worry on these 4 nurses' faces. I couldn't use the bathroom because I had had an epidural. The muscles that control for you to actually release your bladder, they were all still numb. And so I could not even use the restroom after the craziness of the stubbornness of me being like, I'm getting up to go to the bathroom. And so the nurses get me back in bed, and I am a little bit scared and worried, even after everything that's gone on, the fact that I can't go to the bathroom, because I've never had that problem before. I've always had an overactive bladder, and so the fact that I could not use the bathroom was honestly terrifying to me. So the nurse says, it's okay, Becky, this is normal, this is the epidural. But in my head, I'm thinking this is going to destroy my bladder. I have a very sensitive bladder, and I'm never going to be able to use the restroom normally again. But that was just my brain. And so she said, if you can't use the restroom in about an hour or 2, then we will just insert another catheter quickly and help you relieve your bladder. So at this point, baby A is fine. Josh has baby A. They want me to try to sleep, so I try to get some sleep. And in a few hours after that, I get up to try to use the restroom again. I almost pass out again. They put me back in the bed, and then they do insert a catheter so that I can relieve my bladder. And that was such a relief to be able to do that, but it was another thing where I was terrified that my bladder was going to be permanently destroyed. Long story short, it's not. It works just fine. Once the epidural wore off, then I am able to use the restroom just fine. So I had mentioned that one thing I had requested of Josh going into labor and delivery was that I did not want to share with friends and family that I was in labor, because I didn't want the pressure of them knowing and me feeling like, what is it, a watch kettle never boils or something like that. And so I didn't want Josh to feel the need that he needed to take time away from being my support to update them. And I just didn't want that pressure. And so that's something we had talked about before. And it was kind of a sweet moment. The next morning at 10 a.m., we were able to text our friends and family that baby A had arrived, that I was safe, healthy, somewhat, recovering from the preeclampsia and healing from birth, and baby A was fine. The only thing that they were a little bit worried about baby A was that he's a little small. He's a 6-pound baby, so he's only in the 3 percentile. He is healthy and fine, but because he was a little baby, his temperature was running a little bit cold. So they wanted him on my chest or on Josh's chest with a warm blanket just to keep him nice and warm because his temperature was running a little bit cold. And so that's what we tried to do all night. So we were up around 10 a.m. and at this point, because of the preeclampsia, I am having my blood pressure checked once an hour. And we are at Sunday, and we do some breastfeeding. And one thing that I am doing throughout that whole night and this whole next day is putting ice packs on where the stitches were, because it was very, very sore and swollen and tender down there. And so the hospital they have these instant ice packs. They only last about 20 minutes. And so about every 20 minutes, I could feel that ice pack not being cold anymore and needing to replace that. So that is something that I was requesting the nurse to assist me with the whole time. They also were coming and rubbing on my tummy just to help close or, help that uterus from hemorrhaging any more than it did, because I did hemorrhage about 1.7 liters of blood during the delivery. But then after that, everything was fine. I did purchase a tincture at the request from Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead called After Ease, and I did have Josh, as soon as I delivered, put some of that under my tongue, and we put that under my tongue every few hours after baby was born. I did not experience any pain of afterbirth or anything like that because I had an epidural, so there was no pain of my uterus contracting or anything like that, which was nice. So now I have been on the magnesium for 24 hours. It's the next day, and we have an appointment. Baby A is checked out by the pediatrician. Pediatrician is happy with how baby looks and super awesome. He had lost some weight, but he hadn't lost too much weight, so they weren't worried about that. We were able to do a little bit of breastfeeding throughout that time, and I was checked by the doctors, and they had given me, after being off magnesium for a while, after doing the blood pressure checks, they were confident in me going home, and they did not have me get on any blood pressure medications to go home with, that my blood pressure had come down enough that they weren't worried about me needing to take blood pressure medication going home. But throughout this time, my head, I had noticed that I had started getting a headache, and throughout the next morning and afternoon, while we were doing our appointments and just getting everything ready in order to go home, I had noticed that my head was starting to bother me. And they had maybe thought that that had something to do with the preeclampsia, or that it was a caffeine headache, because at that point I hadn't had any caffeine in 2 days. And so no one seemed to be super concerned with the headaches. So after we had all of our appointments with the lactation specialist, the pediatrician, my OB, and they were confident in us going home, baby was healthy, I seemed relatively healthy, other than a little bit of headache issues, blood pressure was fine. We were able to go home at 3 o'clock, which was amazing. I did not shower. I had planned to shower when I was at the hospital. I brought all this stuff to shower, but after all the craziness of everything that had happened and the fact that I was on magnesium and I just wanted to rest, I thought, I'm going to shower when I get home, and it's going to be the best shower of my entire life. So we leave the hospital around 3 o'clock on Saturday, and we decide we want Thai food. So Josh and I put in this massive order for Thai. I wanted everything. Normally we get like 2 things and we share. I ordered 4 entrees. I wanted the curry, I wanted the paki mao, I wanted the vegetables, I wanted the salad rolls, I wanted it all. And so we went really big and we ordered a huge spread of Thai. We get home, we have our food that we picked up on the way home. Josh and I both shower, we get settled in, we eat our dinner, and it was the best dinner I think I've ever had in a long time. It was fabulous. We do a little bit of breastfeeding and we go to bed early, and that was day 1 at home. The next day I'm noticing headaches, so now it is Monday and I'm noticing that my head is starting to bother me. And I tell Josh, I think we need to go get a blood pressure cuff. And so he runs down the next Monday morning. He goes, gets a blood pressure cuff, and I take my blood pressure. It's running about 135/85, which is what it was when I was leaving the hospital. So it wasn't crazy high, nothing that I was worried about at that point. High for me, my typical blood pressure is about 112/75. But after all that we had been through and the fact that I had just given birth, I had preeclampsia, I had all the things, I wasn't really worried about it being 135/85-ish. But the headaches were there, and basically baby A and I stayed in bed all day. We rested, we relaxed, did some breastfeeding. That's what we did all day. One of my favorite shows was out, and so I wanted to treat myself. We had leftover Thai for dinner, and I had, I wanted to treat myself that night to watch my favorite show and eat some Thai food and sit there and really enjoy it. It was very difficult for me to do that because my head was really starting to hurt. It kind of progressively got worse and worse throughout the day. And at this point, I have to have an ice pack on my head in order to sit there and function to watch my show. Josh went and got me his beanie so that I could put an ice pack on my head and I could put a beanie on my head. And we are thinking this, I don't know what we were thinking, but my head was hurting, and I had Googled pregnancy and headaches, and you can get pregnancy hormonal induced headaches with breastfeeding apparently. That popped up, so I was like, that's what it is. I think that it's all the hormones. It has to do with like the estrogen dropping or I don't know. Whatever I Googled, it said that is normal, that you can get headaches when you're right after birth because of how the hormones change in your body. So that's what I assumed it was. So then we go to bed and we get up to do baby A's 3 a.m. feeding, and I am in excruciating pain. I can't look down when I'm holding him to try to breastfeed him. I have to have Josh hold him there because I can't look down. It's extremely painful to have my head up and to look down. So at the 3 a.m. feeding, Josh is helping me. It's very stressful, extremely painful in my head. That's it. It's only painful in my head. And so we are able to feed baby. We put baby back down. I'm able to fall back asleep. I wake up at 5 a.m. because baby A is going to wake up at 6 a.m. for his next feeding. And I am in probably the most pain I've ever had in my head in my life. And I call my dad and I call him to pray for me because I know that I need to breastfeed my son again. And I wanted Josh to sleep. That's why I called my dad, and I just needed him to pray that I would be able to get through that next breastfeeding session, because I knew that holding him and looking down was just going to be so painful. And I didn't know what was causing these headaches, and I couldn't take any ibuprofen because my kidneys with the preeclampsia, they weren't doing very well. And that's a side effect or a symptom of preeclampsia, is that you can do damage to your kidneys. And my numbers were so high of how poorly my kidneys were doing that the doctors didn't want me taking ibuprofen. And so I was taking Tylenol to help with my head. But at that 5 a.m., I took some ibuprofen and Tylenol because I was in so much pain. I didn't know how I was going to be able to feed my son at 6 a.m. And I thought, you know what, I just have to do it. So then at 5 a.m. I ice my head for an hour. So from 5 to 6, baby A gets up, Josh gets up, we work on breastfeeding together. I'm trying to do it laying down because it hurts to have my head up. And that was a lot. So we get through that moment, and then we go back to bed, and around 8 a.m. the next day, I wake up and I am still in excruciating pain. I go and I get a big bag of ice. I put it on my head and I get in the shower and I'm just bawling because I am in so much pain. So I get through that shower, I get out, and I take my blood pressure, and it is extremely high. Let me look, I can tell you what the numbers are. The first time I took it after getting out of the shower and bawling, I probably shouldn't have taken it because I was standing up and I was crying and I was under a lot of duress. And so it probably was not the best time to be taking it. But that first reading was 185 over 157. So we are thinking, this is not good. We need to go back to the doctors. After about 5 minutes of trying to sit there and relax, I take my blood pressure again, and it's 160 over 107. And then I call my doctor, and I'm on hold for about a half an hour, trying to get a hold of who I need to talk to. I want to get a hold of my OB so that they know what's going on. And in that time, I take my blood pressure again, and it's 154 over 96. And then I take it again 10 minutes later, and it's 183 over 116. So my blood pressure is severely high and dangerously high again. So I finally get a hold of my doctor, and they tell me where I need to go. I need to go back to the hospital, and I need to have them evaluate me. And so at this point, I'm texting my parents. Josh is getting baby A ready. I had been in the shower for a little bit. I was out of the shower. We don't even have a diaper. We still don't even have a diaper bag. So Josh is just getting a bag with different baby things. We don't even know exactly what we need at this point. We're brand new to all of this. And we get ready as quickly as we can. And we head to the hospital, and I'm letting my parents know what's happening. And at this point, my dad texts and he said, you know, there's a thing called a spinal leak headache that can happen due to an epidural. And because of this whole time, we are thinking that these headaches have to do with the blood pressure. And that was the first time when he texted that we thought, oh, maybe there's two things going on. So we get in the car, and we are in the car by 10 a.m. and we are heading back to the hospital. We're heading to a different hospital actually this time, but our doctor had called the two different hospitals we have in our area, and the one that I had delivered at was full at that point. So I'm glad that we talked and we didn't just go to the hospital and we didn't just go to the ER. I'm glad that I called my doctor, because they wanted us to go back to labor and delivery, not to the ER, general ER. And so we get to labor and delivery, and they put us in a triage room, and around 10 a.m. is when we get there, and my blood pressure is very high. It's in the severe range. And the nurse is so sweet, and she tells me that they're probably going to put me on blood pressure medication again, which is fine. But that the doctor probably is going to recommend getting on magnesium again. Which, if you've ever been on that medication, it's not fun. It makes you feel really sick. And once you're on it for 24 hours. And so I knew that I was looking at being in the hospital again for at least 24 hours, but probably 2 days. And so that was really upsetting. But I was in a lot of pain, and at this point, we're starting to try to put the pieces together. The doctor comes in, and I have my moment where I break down, but it's okay. I pull it back together, and at this moment, the doctor comes in, and she does recommend we do blood pressure medication, and we do another 24 hours of magnesium. And then at this point, we're trying to piece together where these headaches are coming from. Are they blood pressure induced headaches? Are they hormone induced headaches? But we're starting to realize that they are spinal fluid leak headaches. So when you get an epidural, and the anesthesiologist did tell us that this was a risk, but it's one of those things that you hear and you goes in one ear and goes out the other, is that if they puncture your spine and there's a little leak of fluid that can happen, and it happens to about 1 in 100 women that have, or 1 in 100 people that have epidurals, where your spine gets punctured all the way through, and spinal fluid will leak out of that puncture when you put your head up. So if I was laying flat, and I didn't realize this fully, but it makes sense looking back, because every time I would try to breastfeed or I was sitting there watching TV, my pain in my head would get out of control. But if I was laying back down, I was okay. And that's because when you put your head up, the fluid leaks out of your spine and it's actually leaking out of your head. And so that decreased pressure in your head is what's causing that excruciating pain. So now we're realizing that I have two things that are going on as we're in the triage and they're trying to get an IV started, is that I have high blood pressure, preeclampsia, and I have a spinal fluid leak headache. And the doctor was really nice. Typically, when you have preeclampsia, the best remedy, the only cure, is to deliver, get the placenta out of you, and the preeclampsia goes away. The doctor put it, she was so nice, she said, you know, our bodies don't read textbooks, and the textbooks say that once you deliver, the preeclampsia goes away and you should be good to go. But my body did not read that textbook, and it decided that it was not done processing this high blood pressure issue. And so I then at this point had made good with the fact that I was going to be in the hospital for some time. And baby A really needed to eat, and so he was able to get some donor milk at that point, and we were able to give him some bottles and he was able to eat, which was a relief, because the idea of having to sit up and feed him was not something that in that moment that I was able to do during that. So after they get the IV in me and they get us to our room, they get the magnesium set up, the anesthesiologist comes in, because now we need to deal with, we've got the blood pressure issue kind of under control, meaning we're on the blood pressure meds, we're on magnesium, we're set, we're going to be in the hospital for a while, but now we need to address the spinal fluid leak. Now, the best cure to fix this leak is what is called a blood patch, and basically what that means is they go back in where they did the epidural and they put in a catheter where the epidural site was, and then they draw your own blood, and then instead of inserting medicine to numb you for an epidural, they actually put your own blood in that spot. That blood clots and closes that leak. My situation was a little bit more complicated because I had had 2 epidural sites, because the first epidural that they tried, the anesthesiologist did not get, and so then he had to try it in a second site. So the anesthesiologist that was perform this blood patch had to guesstimate which site was probably the site that had the puncture in it. He decided to go with the upper epidural site because his thinking was that hopefully if it was the upper one or the lower one, if it ended up being the lower one, the blood would, with gravity, go down and clog both of those. Typically, he says statistically, a blood patch will cure the headache within 1 hour for 80% of women. And if you need a second blood patch, it typically cures 98% of women. So if they need a second one, 98% of women are cured within the 1 hour. So it's about noon at this point, and he does the blood patch. I feel like there might have been a little bit of relief, but I knew pretty quickly that that blood patch did not work. I was still in pretty excruciating pain. At this point, it's around 2 o'clock, and Josh and I are just hanging out. We are trying to figure out what the next step is. We realize we're going to be in the hospital for a while, and so Josh decides to go home with baby, and he decides to go pack up our hospital bag because we didn't bring anything. We didn't think we were going to stay in the hospital for at least a day or two. And so he ends up going home, and he ends up repacking our hospital bag, and then getting a few things, and then coming back to the hospital. And at this point, I'm just resting, and we are trying to figure out what exactly we're doing. I'm just on magnesium, trying to rest, trying to stay back, trying to keep my head down so that we can keep these headaches under control. Josh ends up coming back, and we end up hanging out for a while, and baby becomes really, really fussy. I try to do some breastfeeding, but it's not something that is working out very well, and it's just excruciating. And so everything is overwhelming, and baby crying is overwhelming, and Josh's plan was to stay the night with us and baby to stay the night with us. Him and I had not even considered that not being an option. But when he was gone, well, and I was able to rest in the hospital and it was just me, it was a lot easier for me to rest and try to heal. And when he came back and the baby was really upset, at one point one of the nurses was in, and she very kindly had recommended that it might be best that baby and Josh go home for the night so that I am able to sleep. And it wasn't a rule it wasn't a hospital policy. He could have stayed, baby could have stayed, no problem. And it was something that was almost a relief to me to have her say that, because then I didn't have to feel, I would have never said, oh, Josh, I think you need to take the baby home. I think I need to be here by myself. I think it's too much to hear him crying. It's too much. The pain that I was in, it was too much. But I would have not been able to ever say that. And so the fact that the nurse had said that, and it kind of gave me permission to be okay with feeling like, okay, this is what's going to be best for everybody in the long run if I'm here by myself and Josh takes baby home. And one thing that I had no worries about was Josh's ability to take care of that baby. I had no concerns with him. At this point, I still hadn't even changed a diaper. We had had baby for a few days in the hospital. We had brought him home for a day and a half, basically 2 days, and I hadn't changed a diaper. Josh was doing all of it. And so me worrying about Josh being able to take care of baby while I'm not there, wasn't worried about it at all. So he did go pick up some formula just so that baby could eat. And we had actually found a really cool formula that I can share with you at some point. It's a goat milk formula that you actually make the formula yourself. You get the raw ingredients and you mix it up and you make it. But it wasn't something that we had figured out at that point. So he just ran to the store and got some formula and was able to take care of baby throughout the night, while I was then able to lay in the bed and rest. So Tuesday night, I sleep in the hospital all by myself, and I am able to get some good rest. Even though my blood pressure is being checked every hour, I am able to at least try to get some sleep, especially after the nurse gave me the fentanyl. I was able to get some really good sleep. But around 6 a.m. is when I found the need to call my mom, and now on Wednesday is when at 6 a.m. I call my mom to have her come and meet me at the hospital so that I'm not at the hospital by myself. Throughout that night, I did try to get up and pump, and the pain of trying to sit up and pump, the nurse ended up having to give me fentanyl, which is a very strong narcotic, because the pain was excruciating. It just was not, sitting up was just not something I could do. And so, so pumping sadly was, we did some pumping laying down, but it just was not, what I needed to focus on was trying to get my body to heal and not try to push myself. And, but I felt this like guilt or need that this is something I needed to be doing. And I'm sure that that's normal for most women. But just having to try to release myself of that and just trying to focus on healing. So my mom ends up dropping everything. She was supposed to babysit my nieces on this day, but she dropped everything because sometimes you just need your mom. And so she ends up coming to the hospital. Josh had a doctor's appointment with for baby to make sure that he was gaining weight at 10 a.m. that next morning, and I wanted him to be able to take baby to that doctor's appointment because he was so little. I wanted to make sure that he was growing, or that he was gaining the weight back that he had lost from, right after birth. And I just didn't want to be in the hospital by myself, because at this point the blood patch didn't work, and there were a couple other treatment options to try to treat this spinal leak headache, and I needed someone there to help me make those decisions, especially because now I had been on some heavy narcotics, and I didn't feel like being in the hospital by myself was something that I really wanted to do. And so my mom was able to call my brother-in-law, and he was able to stay home from work and take care of his kids, which was amazing, so that my mom could come to the hospital and sit there with me. So the next day, and my blood pressure is being checked every hour throughout this whole process. And the blood pressure is starting to come down, but it's not coming down as much as they want. So at some point throughout the night, they do end up upping my blood pressure medication, and then it starts to get better and under control. But at this point in my life, I'm not worried about the blood pressure at all. I feel like in my own head that medicine, or like we are at this place in modern medicine where we can take care of this blood pressure. What I'm concerned about is my head, because my head, I've never felt pain like this before in my entire life, and I want my head to feel better because I'm desperate to feel better. I've never felt this kind of pain before in my life. So my mom comes, and maybe about an hour or two after my mom gets there, another anesthesiologist comes in, and we talk about treatment options. One treatment is to do another blood patch, but every time you do a blood patch, you increase the risk of puncturing your spine again, because you're basically doing another epidural. There is a migraine medication that I can take that is an oral medication that is a high caffeinated medication with some other stuff in it. And then there's an IV medication that I can do that makes you feel really, really sick. And I'm already on magnesium. I'm already gonna have to be in the hospital for another 24 hours, so we decided to try to do that migraine medication. So we get on the migraine medication, and that seems to help a little bit. It's to where I can sit up kind of in the bed, like I could lay the bed up just a little bit, but I couldn't stand up or anything like that. And if I was up for any length of time, then it would start to hurt again. So we get on that IV medication. So at this point, it is Wednesday afternoon. I've been on this migraine medication for a while now, and Josh had met with the landscaper. He had the doctor's appointment, and we went back and forth whether Josh should come to the hospital for a few hours with baby before I go back to bed, because I know that I'm going to be in the hospital for one more night. And my mom is with me this whole time. My dad ends up coming and hanging out with us for a little bit too. We decide that it would be best that Josh ends up just staying home with baby. Baby was the fussiest he's ever been. He's been the easiest baby so far, but for some reason on this day, this Wednesday, he was super fussy. He ends up losing his umbilical cord. Josh thinks that maybe his clothes or something were pulling on it. I'm not sure if it was him realizing that he's outside the womb and he's having these hunger feelings that he had never had before. But up until that point and after that point, he's been extremely easy. But we just felt like maybe it would be best that Josh just stays here with baby, and I just stay in the hospital and try to get better. And I'm with my family, so I'm not alone in the hospital. So they have me on this migraine medication up until 12 p.m. They wanted me to do 4 rounds of it before we decide on what the next step is to try to manage these migraine headaches. So at midnight, I take my last pill, and they want a few hours of that pill before then we make a decision. And my mom ends up going home after dinner. She ends up leaving on Wednesday around 8 p.m. and I'm totally okay with that. I felt like I would be able to sleep better if I didn't feel like she wasn't sleeping next to me, like her, not being able to sleep next to me. I thought that I would feel better if I knew she was at home, sleeping in her own bed, and I would try to be able to get some sleep. So at 3 a.m. the next day, so now it's Thursday, a phlebotomist comes in to take my blood, and I realize my headaches have not gotten any better. I could wait until the next day to talk with the anesthesiologist, but we are in a hospital. Women are giving birth all the time. There is an anesthesiologist on call all the time. I can either wait until the morning, but I don't want to. I want to try to do another blood patch. I was desperate to try to fix this problem. And because the first anesthesiologist had said that, you know, the first time it's about 80% of women are taken care of and that headache goes away within the first hour. And then if you do it a second time, you're at about a 98% chance that, you know, the blood patch is going to work. And so I talked to the nurse finds the anesthesiologist, and by 4 a.m. that morning, everybody's in there and we are attempting to do a second blood patch. But again, my situation was a little bit more complicated because there are the 2 epidural sites. And so she decides, instead of doing the blood patch on the upper one, like the first anesthesiologist did the blood patch on, we're going to try it on the second one, or the lower one. And so she ends up doing the blood patch, and I pretty instantly knew, and I was pretty upset that it didn't work. I'm texting Josh, and I'm talking to Josh now at this point. It's about 5 a.m. and I'm pretty devastated that this blood patch did not work. It's not a very fun process to go through, but I was willing to go through it if it meant that I was going to be able to be a functioning human again. Now we're at Thursday. Josh shows up at the hospital that morning. I hadn't seen him now for about 18 hours. I hadn't seen baby A for about 18 hours, and it was time that they come and meet me at the hospital. There is one more medication I can try, and that is an IV medication, or there's one other treatment option I could do, which would be to do nothing. And so my goal was, I am going to try this last IV medication. The doctor or the anesthesiologist had come in, because we could have done a third blood patch, but at that point, the risk did not outweigh the reward. And so this anesthesiologist did not want to do a third blood patch, and I was on the same page at that point. And so typically, another thing I should note that I haven't said yet is that spinal leak headaches typically heal themselves within 7 to 10 days after the initial epidural is in. And so we are now at day 5. We are day 5 from the epidural. And so I'm still in excruciating pain when I put my head up. So I'm still willing to try something if it's going to give me 2 days of reduced relief. But when you're in so much pain, the idea of there being no pain, it seems like so far away. So Josh and baby A show up at the hospital. Then we decide to do this IV medication, and the IV medication gets put in. And they did warn me that this is going to make you feel icky. It's going to make you feel sick. And I was thinking it was going to make me feel icky like the magnesium did, because I'm off the magnesium now at this point, and so I'm not really worried about feeling sick. I had been through the magnesium treatment. I knew what feeling icky felt like, and so I was like, I'm okay with feeling icky. So I start the IV medication around 10 a.m. It hits instantly, and it is some of the worst pain I've ever experienced. It made me feel awful. So it went from now I have head pain to also a ton of abdominal pain. Whatever this medication does, it affects all the neurons, and it affects all the smooth muscle neurons that affect digestion and your skeletal muscles. So my whole entire body is twitching. All my neurons are firing. Your digestion goes crazy because all of the neurons that affect your digestion go crazy, and it lasts for about an hour and a half. And I am in excruciating pain. Poor Josh is sitting there, and it's like I'm in labor all over again before the epidural, because it was excruciating. I did not realize what I was signing up for. They warned me. They told me this is going to be very uncomfortable. You're going to feel really sick. But I didn't realize how sick I was going to feel. So that was a really weird experience. It lasted for about an hour and a half. And the doctor said that for some people, it takes their spinal headache away. Sometimes people need this treatment twice, but I wasn't about to sit around and wait. I had to wait 8 hours if I wanted to do this treatment again, to do it twice. And he said some people, if they wait and they do the treatment again, then their spinal headaches go away. But I, at this point, was willing to just deal with the spinal headache and try to have the spinal headache heal on its own. I felt like I had done everything that I could to get better. I did 2 blood patches, I did the migraine medication, and I had done this IV medication. And now at this point, I am ready just to go home and be in pain at home and heal at home and try to just live out the next few days, hopefully that it's going to get better. So on this Thursday, after we do the IV medication treatment, Josh and I realize it's time to go home. We're just gonna go heal at home. We're gonna play this out at home. We're gonna just try to heal at home. So we end up leaving the hospital now Thursday at 2 o'clock. We pick up our dogs on the way home and we end up dropping them off at my mother-in-law's house because we just weren't ready to go home with our baby and with our 2 dogs and manage all of that with the pain that I am still in. And my doctor ends up sending us home with some blood pressure medication and that migraine medication, because that migraine medication did help. And so we get home and we end up getting a smoothie on the way home, and it's wonderful. And then for that whole Thursday afternoon, I basically just lay on my back. I can't get up and sit upright. And then on Friday, we rest. I can't, so at this point, I can't sit my head up. So if I need to go anywhere, I'm crawling on my hands and knees to get to that place. I'm showering, literally laying on the shower floor with my head on the floor because I cannot lift my head up. So for Friday and the rest of Thursday and Friday, that I eat laying down on the floor because it's easier to lay on the floor and eat than to sit or try to lay back and eat this way. Saturday, we rest, we do the same thing. Sunday is the first day that I can walk kind of standing straight up. Sunday, my mother-in-law comes over and she folds a bunch of laundry and we sit there and I'm actually able to sit on the couch and talk to her. And Monday, I was feeling well enough to drive myself to a doctor's appointment. My blood pressure is good. We're reducing my blood pressure medication, and hopefully within the next week, I will be off the blood pressure medication. I've been sitting here talking to you with my head up, no problem, and we now are past it. So it has been a whirlwind. I had no idea that epidurals came with this risk. Right after birth, I was singing epidural praises. I was so happy I had one. I was so grateful. My birth and delivery, or my labor and delivery story, I feel like was a positive one. It was, a lot happened if you watch that or listen to that video. But because of the epidural, I wasn't in a lot of pain. And overall, I would say my labor and delivery was a very, very, very positive one, even though it was kind of crazy. But I think all births are crazy. But now that I know the risk that comes along with it, I maybe in the future would consider not doing one. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe next time I would have a better anesthesiologist the first time and I wouldn't have this problem. There's a lot of question marks. I don't know. And after posting on Instagram about a little bit about my experience, I'm realizing how common this happens. If the first blood patch had taken care of the headache and it didn't drag itself out for this, lengthy process of healing, I might have a different outlook on it. I'm not exactly sure, but I can say right now I am grateful that I am able to sit here and talk to you. I had some very depressed moments where I just cried. Because I felt guilty about the time that I missed with my son. And Josh was so awesome, and so supportive, and in the grand scheme of things, it's okay. But the despair when you're in so much pain is scary, and you're not sure if you're ever gonna feel better. So I'm super grateful and happy that I am sitting here talking to you, because 3 days ago, the idea of just sitting was not fathomable. And so we've come a long way, and I'm grateful to be where I am today. And I'm grateful for you for hanging out with me throughout this process, because it's kind of been a depressing story. But it has a happy ending. It's kind of cliche, but I would go through all of it again to be sitting here and being able to hold my baby. And so in the end, it was all worth it. But maybe next time I would consider not doing an epidural, but in the moment I was glad I had one. So I'm not exactly sure, you know, hindsight, you can always look back and think, oh, I could have done things a little bit different. But I'm happy I'm here today, right now, talking to you, because it means I feel a lot better. I'm sure I'm missing parts of the story. One of the biggest things I was most concerned about during postpartum was the healing from all that goes on down there and all the bleeding. But with everything else that has gone on, that has been the least of my concerns. Josh, I was thinking it would be kind of fun to do where I go over, you know, the things that I used in my hospital bag, the things I overpacked. You guys were right on a few of those things. And then going over like the postpartum care, the stuff that really, really helped, because there definitely were things that were really great and some things that I didn't really need. And I'm healing both physically and all that. The postpartum stuff really has not, like the healing down there has not been as big of a deal. It probably would have been a lot more big of a deal if I hadn't had the other issues, you know. But I can just say that we are doing well, and I hope this was encouraging to you. I hope it wasn't scary. I just wanted to be kind of open and honest with my experience. If any of you have gone through this, I feel your pain. It is a lot. Well, I just want to say a huge thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to my story. It was kind of a depressing one. I feel like, I hope it was encouraging. I don't know if it is or not. I'm trying to be open and honest and raw and real with all of it. So thank you for listening and being here. There were definitely things that I did not expect when it came to, that I was pleasantly surprised when it came to labor and delivery, especially if you listen to that labor and delivery story. And then there were things that I was surprised that could go wrong. And but overall, I would say that where I am today, I at one point was laying in the hospital bed very angry and mad and upset that this was my story and this was what I was going through. And I was texting Josh, and he just was so supportive. And I was worried that I was going to have bitterness and resentment that this was my story. When I was laying in that hospital bed, especially when I was by myself. But I think it's okay that this is my story, and it is my story, so it is what it is. And now that I'm out of pain, I realize that it was just a moment of time, and it's still okay to be upset with that time that was lost with my son, but it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. And I'm just grateful that we're over this hump and that we're healing and that I'm sitting here talking to you. And I'm just really grateful you're here listening. I hope you are having a fantastic day. If you enjoyed this video, I can post a couple of my other videos here you can go enjoy between now and my next upload. I hope you are having a fantastic day, and I really, really appreciate every single one of you, and I cannot wait to see you next time. Bye, friend.